Today, I want to talk about gratitude, and it's a very healthy emotion or a feeling, and we need to encourage it. We can develop this healthy emotion. Frequently, we are so busy that we miss much of what's happening in our lives that we can feel grateful towards. And that is really the root of gratitude, seeing what we have and enjoying it and being content with what it is. Another way to put this is that we frequently see what we don't have and don't see what we do have. And it's good from time to time to contemplate our good fortune. I'm going to start with talking about our spiritual situation that we are in. It's so easy to get caught up in our mundane life, put most of our emphasis on short-term mundane things, and push back our Buddhist beliefs and faith and our spiritual goals. So I'm just going to go through some very basic Buddhist teachings here. The first is that we have a human birth. We're human. We have a human form, and this is the best possible form to be in if we are looking at escaping from a cyclic existence or samsara. Very simply, we have not been born in the hell realm, the hungry ghost realm, or the animal realm, where in these the suffering is so great that there's no time to even think about Dharma or practicing. We're just all consumed. Beings in these realms are just all consumed with suffering, or in the animal realm, it isn't all suffering, but there's just plain ignorance. The Tibetan's translation of the word animal means one that goes hunched over. In other words, just not being aware of the bigger situation. A very good example in my house, these little box elder bugs that have a way of finding their way inside. I don't know if anyone else has these, but they are looking for a warm place to spend the winter. I don't know what their lifespan is, but they get into the house, and of course, there's nothing to eat, or at least not much. Then you find them dead, lying all over the house. That isn't much of an existence, and if you look at larger animals, right now is not a good time to be a deer because deer hunting just started. I've got a lot of squirrels here, and they're kind of fun to watch. But on the other hand, sometimes, like last night, I heard an owl. And I have heard owls sometimes in the fall to the point where I don't see any squirrels around the house anymore for a while. Then the owls I don't hear anymore, and then suddenly there are more squirrels again. In the animal realm, there's always predation, whether it be human or other animals, and there's really no respite from trying to find your next meal, protect yourself from the elements and predation and so forth. So we are not in either of the two God realms, where beings in these realms are overcome with pleasure. They're too attached to pleasure and again have no desire to practice. The third, or another factor that we have in our favor, is that we are born in a culture that is not dominated by wrong view, that's seeing wrong as right or spiritual as being wrong. In the United States, there are opportunities. There is a freedom of religion, and so there are opportunities to come in contact with Buddhism. Another factor in our favor is that we are not born in a dark age. dark as things may seem when you read the news, this is not a dark age in terms of no access to the Dharma. We do have access to the Dharma. The last of this is that we are free of having physical or mental handicaps that prevent us from practicing. We certainly, some of us that are older, our bodies have handicaps, but it doesn't prevent us from practicing, studying, listening and hearing, and so forth. Things that we have that are in our favor to continue on this line of thinking is that we have the teachings available to us. KTD is the seat of Galwan Karmapa in the West, that our faculties are intact, we are intelligent enough, our mind is stable enough, we can practice, we can understand the Dharma. Another in our favor is that we have a karmic predisposition to practice. The very fact that you are here this morning indicates that, and that you're receptive to Buddhism and to spirituality. Again, a lot of people in this country are not, and we do have this in our favor. Then there are outer circumstances that we are fortunate to benefit from, that the Buddha appeared in this era and his teachings still remain. A Buddha doesn't always teach the Dharma, but in this aeon he did teach, and again these teachings are preserved, they're passed down. There's a lineage, a living lineage of realized masters that have passed these teachings down. The Mahamudra lineage supplication is a very good example of that. And then finally, there are very, very good realized teachers alive today that teach, that we can receive teachings from and instructions from and so forth. So if we think about this, there is a lot that we have to be grateful for, to feel gratitude towards. We actually are in a very, very fortunate situation, and we need to take advantage of this opportunity that we have. Receive the blessings of the three jewels, so that we have this connection with Karmapa and KTD. I think most of us have met Khenpo Karta Rinpoche and other great teachers. And then, because of our practice, we understand mindfulness and awareness. We may not be able to practice it as much as we would like to, but we do have this understanding that it's important to be mindful of what's going on around us and aware of what's going on, even if it's only a little bit. And to understand that the path is an inner path, investigating our own mind and so forth. So we just have so much in this area, and it's good to contemplate this. It's easy to get caught up in the mundane world and miss all of this and look for short-term happiness, short-term gains, and so forth. Last week, I talked about the 8 worldly dharmas, and contemplating these thoughts help counteract just getting totally caught up in the 8 worldly dharmas. So, in terms of our mundane life, ideally, there is no difference between our spiritual life and our mundane life. You might say reality, we do see differences, and we get caught up in things like our income, our source of income, our ties to the relative world, our food, our housing, insurance, transportation, healthcare, taxes, family, just to mention a few. So How do we relate to these two aspects of our life? That is the question. If we look at our mundane life, again, it's easy to see what we don't have and want it and miss what we do have. It's good to think about how much we receive from other people and the experiences that we have in relationships that we have to appreciate. I went to the grocery store yesterday. I did some other shopping yesterday. Of course, I came in contact with people, people at the grocery store at the checkout. And behind that were people that stock the shelves. And then there are people that bring in trucks the groceries to the grocery store, and then the people that grow it, and on and on and on. There's a very long and wide web of relationships that bring the food to the grocery store so that I can buy it, bring it home, and eat it. And it was delicious, what I had for supper and breakfast this morning. If we can appreciate that and perhaps even tell the people that we meet at the grocery store that work there, thank you. Give them a smile, give them some recognition. When we appreciate other people, it brings out a good feeling within. Being grateful to others just naturally benefits ourselves because of our own mind being more comfortable, being more at ease, and so forth. Now, I live here in a rural area in western Wisconsin, and quite honestly, it's quite beautiful here. I'm going to go for a walk later on today outside and enjoy the trees. I'm a tree hugger, and with the leaves gone, the trees, you can see the structure of the trees, you might say. And it's really quite beautiful. And then, of course, there are birds and squirrels. I usually scare up a deer or two when I go for a walk in the woods, and it just can be very, very wonderful. Chogyam Trungpa would talk about seeing things fully. In other words, don't just gloss over it. Really be mindful and aware and try to appreciate it, to experience it without a lot of conceptual overlay. Another thing to feel grateful for is how others have contributed to what you accomplished. I have been thinking about this lately, that there have been a lot of things that I have done that it's easy to think, oh, I did this. But conditions and causes were there that allowed me to do this. For instance, the building that the center is in, the building that I'm in right now, it's built out of stone, and I could say, well, I built it. Well, most of the stone were delivered by a neighbor of mine, by his kids that he hired. It was spring planting time, and he had a new tractor and a new, bigger plow, and he dug up a lot of the rock in his fields, and he hired kids to put them on wagons and then drive them by my place to a landfill. And I called him up that night and I said, you know, if they stop here, I'll help them unload these rocks and it'll go quicker. And well, I got the rocks delivered. Thanks to my neighbor, thanks to some high school kids that he hired. And I had helped building the structure too. And then, of course, there was the cement company that I bought a lot of concrete from, and on and on and on. Many, many people contributed to this. You can look at any aspect of your life and you realize that, well, you might think you did it. It was because of causes and conditions that it happened. And it's a little humbling, but there's also gratitude for others. No matter, even if you're out in the North Woods all by yourself, you're using technology that have been developed by our ancestors. It goes way back to the discovery of fire. And an axe is made out of steel, and our ancestors learned how to make steel, and on and on and on like that. The food. One of my favorite examples is you might think about a good Italian meal of spaghetti. Well, the Chinese invented the noodles. I once Googled it and I found that somewhere in China they discovered a 5,000-year-old bowl of noodles. Probably wasn't very edible, but it was 5,000 years old. And you're probably eating that on a porcelain plate. And of course, porcelain came from China. And here is one of my favorite parts of this is it was a intellectual property of China before they had the term intellectual property, but a Jesuit priest learned the secret and published a book in the early 1700s in Europe, and then they started making porcelain in Europe. But the Romans didn't have porcelain unless they imported it from China. And then your tomato sauce. Well, tomatoes come from Peru and we're a New World food. So your Italian meal, I'm not sure where the Italian part of it is. It just has to do with this interconnections. And same thing for our clothing, our culture. I like electricity, but it took a long time before people figured out how to produce electricity, how to use it, and so forth. Even the English language keeps evolving. When I went into retreat back in 1993, it was January of 93, a menu you would get at a restaurant, and then I got out, and a menu was something you got on the internet or if you made a phone call to a business, and on and on and on. And we can appreciate all of these things that we are able to use and benefit from. Even though it doesn't always go as the way we would like them. We've all had problems with our computer where they're just not working properly, or making a phone call to a business about some problem and it doesn't go so well. But the very fact that we're in this situation where that can go wrong means that we're in a very good place overall. I like to think of my grandmother and the house that I live in. My grandmother was she was born in 1896, and the house that I'm in was probably built about the same time. And my grandmother was born on a farm. Her house would have been older. But anyway, she would talk lovingly about her childhood on the farm and having horses and the farm work and so forth. Well, I can tell you when I moved into this house in 1971, it had the original windows, and you could tell which direction the wind was coming from in the wintertime because it would be the cold side of the house. Curtains would actually move with the wind in the wintertime. And there were a lot of other things about the house that were closer to when it was built than where I wanted it. It's easy to see again, well, I didn't have these modern conveniences. The bathroom wasn't very nice and yada, yada, yada. But that isn't where gratitude comes. Here's a quote by Yawan Karmapa. I do not think there is any contradiction between feeling contented and progressing in life. Contentment is the ability to enjoy fully what you have. Contentment does not mean that you stop progressing. It means being able to savor and make full use of what you have. So the point is that we can enjoy what we are having, what's going on in our life, even at the same time wanting to improve things in the future. And it's our mind that experiences happiness and contentment. It's not in what we're actually experiencing, it's how we experience it. And this contentment is a state of happiness and satisfaction. Sometimes when we're doing programs here, we'll do eating in silence and mindful eating. After we're done with that, well, what I do is eat in silence, and then every few minutes I will hit the singing bowl, and the instructions are to stop eating and listen to the sound. And when you don't hear the sound anymore, then go back to eating. This helps us be more mindful of eating and the taste of the food and so forth. And what happens then is people, when we're done, talk about how good the food tasted. And frequently had someone say, I've got to get the recipe for that because that particular dish tasted so well. On the other hand, if you have a wild mind, it's impossible to be contented. Your mind is jumping around and from one thing to another to another. And there's no contentment. You just want more and more and more. So mindfulness is very important in terms of contentment, gratitude, and appreciation. So mindfulness is paying attention to what's happening, not about your thoughts about what's happening. The next thing I want to point out, this actually has to do with the Lojong teachings that we're studying in the book class. But at the end of the day, it's good to look back and see what you accomplished and acknowledge what you did and feel good about it. If you're like me, there is something that you wanted to accomplish that you didn't for one reason or another. Don't get too hung up about that. Acknowledge it and say, well, maybe tomorrow I'll work on that. And of course, at least for me, frequently I will feel, well, I could have done better on that, whatever it was. I could have done more that day. I could have done it better, more skillfully, or whatever. Make a note of it, but don't go and beat yourself up or guilt trip yourself. Just avoid the self-criticism and just encourage yourself to do a little bit better next time. I like working with tools, and there's a phrase or a saying that comes from, I don't know, maybe woodworking. And it's an amateur blames his tools or himself. A craftsman works with his mistakes. And a bodhisattva does the same, works with his mistakes or her mistakes rather than getting caught up in blame. So it's good to encourage ourselves to do better, but again, be content with what you have. Make peace with what is in front of you rather than being dissatisfied and wanting to change things all the time. If you feel that way, you'll be unhappy, you'll be stressed out. Basically, if you can't do anything about it, let go of it. There's just no point in being unhappy if there's nothing you can do about it. So the recipe for happiness is to make peace with what is. Expectations are fantasies. It's good to not take them too seriously. Here's a story from when I was a prison chaplain. It was an hour and 45-minute drive one way to get to work. I was supposed to get to work at a certain time, and and the warden's office had a window looking out on the parking lot, and he could see me walking from my car, entering the prison. And sometimes he would wave at me as I would be walking in, entering. Well, sometimes I would leave late in the morning, and if I wanted to, for an hour and 45 minutes, I could keep thinking about, I'm going to be late, I'm going to be late, will the warden see me, yada, yada, yada. And, well, I never got, shall we say, any kind of communication from the warden or my supervisor or anybody else that I was late. But if I wanted to, I could be spending an hour and 45 minutes worrying about that. Part of it being content and being happy is just letting go of speculating and expectations. And you could have expectations the other way too. Like, let's just say Thanksgiving, which is coming up in a few days, expecting that you're going to have a nice day with family and things are going to da 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 da. Well, it could happen. But on the other hand, in many families, they get together and let's just say history raises its vicious head and fights break out, or mom loved you better, or whatever. Maybe so, maybe not, but you don't have to, you might say, fantasize about this before it happens. So keeping a positive outlook, a positive attitude is really important. And being grateful, being happy, and being contented. Avoid ruminating on unpleasant things about how bad you feel. Listening to negative things. Right now, I think I watch too much news, read too much news. I think I'm going to have to go on a diet of the news. If you just keep reading this over and over and over again, it just brings you down. There's no point to that. Why purposely bring yourself down? It's interesting. I did look this morning. I had a little time and I did go to the Washington Post where I have a subscription. And one of the main articles was about voters in Door County, Wisconsin. And I had to read that. And it basically said they've had enough. They don't want to talk about politics. They don't want to talk. It's just too much. They just don't want to go there. And I think that's a good attitude. Again, there's a lot of beauty in Wisconsin. Come and visit me sometime. We'll go for a walk in the woods. So anyway, there is beauty in people. There's beauty in animals. There's beauty in the environment. And actually, there's beauty in everyday objects. Take your pick. Well, I've got a teacup here. It's quite nice having a little sip of tea, and it's a nice teacup. You could just look at the teacup from different angles and see different things about the teacup. When I look at one side, I see this. Look at another side, you see a handle here. Can look at it from on top in and so forth. I'm not going to look at it from the bottom because I'll spill my tea. That'll be a whole nother experience. But that reminds me of a talk that I attended that Thich Nhat Hanh gave. He's a great Vietnamese Zen master, and he had a cup of tea on his table. And as he's giving the talk, he moves his hand, hits the cup of tea, and spills it. His reaction was he mindfully cleaned up the spill. So even when things go wrong, you can apply mindfulness rather than feeling, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I should have been more mindful, yada, yada, yada. What artists do is try to bring out different aspects. Depends on what the artist's specialty is, but they try to bring out something for the viewer to appreciate. And there is so much in the environment if we can look at that with this open eye, open mind, and see it. And you can see it from different angles and see different things about it. And there's so much else that is that same way. If we look at things one way and have a certain attitude about it, well, suddenly things can change and we can look at the same thing, see it very differently. For instance, I had a difficult relationship with my parents, but when I started realizing and thinking about what they did for me, what I benefited from, I started seeing them in a very different way and was able to eventually let go of the anger that I had towards them. The other day, I met a longtime friend, a person that moved out here in 1975 at a store, and we had a long conversation, and we were talking about way back then. It brought back memories of how I had a certain feeling of comfort knowing that if worse came to worse, I could, always call up my folks and, I could get some money if I needed it. And my friend was saying, the problem that poor people have is that they have no one, no friends to help them if they need to have help. And both of us had very little money back in the early 70s and even late 70s, but we had a certain safety net because of our parents, our friends, and so forth. And if you start looking at these benefits of relationships, again, we can appreciate that and feel gratitude towards that. And then there is how we look at ourselves. And I have a quote here from Traleg Rinpoche that I think is important to bring in here. A healthy self-image is accommodating. It is forgiving. It permits and allows. It does not demand perfection from us. Perfection is something we aspire to. It is being gentle with oneself, warts and all, accepting all aspects of oneself, forgiving one's failures and defects, and accepting that we can sometimes make mistakes and fail. By thinking like this, having that big vision and positive self-image, one can accommodate all aspects of oneself and still continue to strive for one's own betterment. The last point that I want to talk about is appreciate ourselves, being content with ourselves, but wanting to improve and become a better person. But we have to have this healthy self-image, which is very different than having an unhealthy ego. It's being accommodating and forgiving of ourselves and well as others, allowing us to make mistakes and not get down on us. It's this gentleness or nurturing. I like that word too, nurturing ourselves, encouraging ourselves to improve, accepting who we are at the present time. What was brought up is this person has a friend who tends to go towards the negative, that, well, if people would things would be better. If this was different, then things would be better. And how do you interact with a person like that that tends to go towards the negative? The first point that I would bring up is to be mindful that you are not dragged down into the negativity, which is very, very difficult. Another point is don't expect to be able to change the other person's mind. There was a time that I was very negative, and what I wanted to hear was more negativity. And I thought it was smart to be negative. Only dumb people just have this cheerful attitude about how nice things are, and well, you're not seeing da 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 da. So, given that, do what you can to maintain the cheerfulness. I didn't talk about humor. I like simple little humor. Sometimes maybe it's the level of a 10-year-old, and maybe your friend doesn't appreciate 10-year-old humor, but sometimes just cracking a silly joke can kind of cut things.